elevator pitch, you know.
Oh. Well, I can tell you what the book's about, but I mean, it's not really a legal book. It's for all working moms, but it's a book about how the moms of this generation are taking charge of their careers, of their professional and their home lives, and how they're saying that they're not satisfied with these all or nothing kind of choices like I had at the law firm. Either work a gazillion hours or don't be here. Yes. So we show that these women have kind of courageously jumped off that linear, partner path or whatever it was that they had always imagined, and decided that they wanted something different that could be equally or even more satisfying. And that's sort of how I feel about my own path. That, yeah, I had like the fancy office downtown and whatever. I made a lot of money, but I was extremely unhappy, and I did not think it was at all conducive to a happy family life. So I finally, for the first time in my life, I jumped off the A train, and did something different. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's going to be more and more common in your generation. I think that the millennials in particular put a high premium on their family lives and having some balance in their life, and that they don't want to be working 24/7. Mm-hmm. They want to have other things in their life. So the reason that work life is getting so much attention over, say, like the last year in particular, is because men are finally starting to really feel the pinch. Mm-hmm. And it was very much demonstrated in April of 2010. There was a big White House forum on work-life issues where Michelle Obama talked about her personal work-life struggles, and the media, kind of take on it was, if a woman like Michelle Obama with her privileges is struggling with this, it's really an issue. Mm-hmm. and another thing is, and that conference put work life into the national conversation in a way that nothing before it had. The experts I've interviewed told us that prior to really the last few years, work life was considered to be a private kind of hush issue that a lot of people felt like should not be discussed outside of the home. And that's really changing. And I mean, because men are feeling it too. There are a lot of young associates at law firms now whose wives are doctors. And so they can't expect that same sort of at-home spouse model that was present a generation ago. Mm-hmm. So something has to shift. And so that's why this has become such a big issue. Mm-hmm.
I read that article or the blog about the man suing the firm.
Yeah, that's a good example. Uh-huh. That was an FMLA. He took his FMLA and then was fired like 2 months later or whatever. So, mm-hmm. It's a discrimination case. But, right, that's a good example right there. Mm-hmm. So, his wife, she could have been I don't know what her profession was, but she had postpartum depression severe. She was hospitalized, and the firm just was not cool with the idea that he should be home taking care of the baby. The firms were much smaller, and then right around, I'm trying to think when it was. I started at the firm in 1999, and I think there were 5 or 6 offices. And in the 4 years that I was there, they probably doubled in size and acquired international offices, and were just buying up law firms left and right. And that was typical of, medium, large firms, firms that were not headquartered in major cities. That's what happened. There was all this consolidation. Mm-hmm. So, now a 2,000 person law firm is not at all unheard of, and there are bigger ones. Mm-hmm. But that was all, merger acquisitions.
Okay. How many other female associate attorneys were there?
At the time, let me think about it for a minute. My entering class, when we started, it was a time when classes were huge. So I think there were 37 of us that started at the same time, mm-hmm. which is extremely large. And probably at least 35 to 40% were women. Okay. But it's funny because I write about this in my book. There were, out of 200 attorneys, there were probably I mean, I could count on my 2 hands the number of women partners, and it was even fewer if you were thinking about the number of women with children, women partners with children. There, the best example for how slow law has been to sort of progress at all was that in 2003, when I had, or no, sorry, in 2002, when I had my first child, there was not an official reduced hours or part-time policy at the firm. That was, 2002. Which, it made me feel like I was some sort of revolutionary trying to think of a reduced hours schedule because there was no official policy on it. And that, for a firm that large, to me, looking back, it's sort of ridiculous that they hadn't put that into place. I think that the firms were, at that point, trying to seem more appealing to young women, but they didn't have the structures in place, they didn't have the policies in place, they didn't have any role models. So for me, all I had to do was look around. There was not a woman that I wanted to emulate who was working there. So it was pretty clear to me that it wasn't going to be a long term. I mean, they would certainly be complying with like FMLA and they actually had a very generous maternity leave policy, which I took advantage of. I had 3 months of paid leave, which was, pretty good. And in fact, I used that lack of policy to my advantage because they wanted to keep me. So because they didn't have a policy, I said, well, when I come back, I want to come into the office 2 days and work the rest of my hours on the reduced schedule from home. And they said, as long as you get your hours in, we don't care how you do it. Which, to their benefit, was fairly open-minded. That being said, I didn't stay at the firm very long after, but that wasn't because, it was more because of my long-term dissatisfaction with working there, rather than, it did not seem like the kind of place that I could work and be the kind of mother I wanted to be. Okay. But I was also extremely unhappy with the work I was doing. So it was kind of a combination. I didn't feel that I was a litigator, but I was in a large firm that wanted a lot of hours, and because the rates going in, they started billing us out at really high rates. So there was no time to sit and there was no mentorship, there was no apprenticeship. You couldn't sit and talk to somebody about how to, structure whatever it was that you were doing, even though it was likely your first time doing it. And so, basically I sat by myself for 11 hours a day, either doing research or trying to write documents that I was not sure how to write, and I felt really incompetent, and I also felt like it wasn't a good use of my skills because I never got to be in front of people, I never got to present anything, I never, I didn't get to, my natural talents are much more, I actually talk about this in my book. When I went and saw a career counselor after about like a year and a half, just trying to figure out why I was so unhappy, and I did a assessment, and only 2% of lawyers had the same personality type that I matched with. And so, and my natural abilities and interest pointed toward a career as a teacher. That was the #1 job for me. So here I am now, and that's what I do, and that's why it's so much better fit for me.
Okay, so you were able to transition right from that firm to
well, I was, but
WVU?
Right, but when I took the position at WVU, it was a major, dial back. I was making, I can't remember how much I was making, like 120 something, I don't know, it was a lot for the time, and I had only been, I was right out of school, worked there for like 4 years. I started the job here, it paid $50,000. So I took a huge pay cut. I also when I first started, I took a huge prestige cut in that the position when I started was a lecturer position, so it didn't even have a professor title. So I took, and in fact that was more painful to me than the loss of the paycheck.
Were you teaching undergrad students or law students?
No, law students. Okay. But I was in Our program has changed, as lots of programs have, but when I started out, I teach first year skills, legal research. Our class is called Legal Reasoning, Research, and Writing. I'm sure you have something similar.
Yeah, we call ours legal methods.
Right. So at some schools, people that teach that have the same status and salary as the people teaching torts and contracts. At some schools, they don't. When I started, we did not. And so for me, having always sort of shot for the highest rung, that was a big step back, but it was something I was willing to do to accommodate motherhood. And also, in addition to the fact that I was very unhappy working at the law firm, it was not a good fit for me. So this was at least a step in the right direction, even though there were sacrifices.
Right. So it seemed it must have been, well, not easy, but you were able to very quickly move up the ladder in terms of going from a lecturer to being, now you're an associate dean?
Associate professor.
Associate professor.
Well, I've been there for 8 years. And my actual title is teaching associate professor. John's the associate dean.
Okay, sorry.
So there is a distinction between my work, or my evaluations are focused on my teaching rather than my scholarship. So, but, at least my title is professor now, and I'm the director of the program. So.
Of the legal writing program?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So, but I've been there for 8 years, and I was promoted 2 years ago. So, which was actually good timing for me because it was when, my kids were a little bit older, and I wasn't as immersed in that. It turned out to be the perfect fit for me because the job I'm in now allowed me to write about what I am truly passionate about, which is work-life balance issues for professional women. And if I had been in a more traditional, like if I had been a property professor, which is something I had considered because my background, I did trust and estates litigation. I thought about, we had a position open for that, and some people had encouraged me to apply for it, but if I had done that, then I would be writing about wills, trusts, that sort of thing, and it's just not really what excites me. Like, I can do it. I wrote an article on a topic like that, but it's not my passion. So, because I was in this position that was slightly less prestigious, but it did not have the same scholarship requirements, I was able to write about what I wanted to write about. So, to me, it's sort of meant to be. Law professors typically write, like at our law school, we write 3 law review articles to meet our tenure requirements.
Right.
So I did that even though I was not on the tenure track per se. What are you doing, honey?
Nothing.
I want to hear about it. So I wrote, like a more traditional scholarship. I wrote a piece on the res judicata fraud exception, which is just something was a big factor in a case that I worked on for a long time. And I wrote a piece about, actually, the first piece that I did that sort of got me thinking this just in this area was a piece on discrimination against women in the legal academy who teach legal writing and other clinical types of jobs.
And what was the argument there?
Well, we empirically proved that so we did like a study. You can look it up. It's called, my co-author's name is Susan Lemer, Liemer.
I thought it was Becky Keller.
This is another piece I wrote. And it's called, Did Your Legal Writing Professor Go to Harvard?
Okay.
And
ours did.
Yeah.
We're the one that's the head of the department.
Right. So